From 4:30, when the first morning light is filtering into the square, buses arrive with the earliest of the workers. Those for whom the day begins while most other people are still asleep, and some of the travellers themselves are hardly awake. Those who have worked throughout the night are already in the square, waiting to be taken home. Most of these early travellers catch the same bus and travel with the same companions every morning. They are familiar, at least by sight, to each other, as familiar as the news vendors who arrive just after 6 with papers to be read at work or on the way home. Familiar, too, is the postman, starting on his round of the business houses. And even more familiar are the many people whose job it is to clean, scrub, and polish away all traces of yesterday before the sun climbs above the dome of the council house to flood the square with light. The early morning queue for nylons is a new feature, but it too is rapidly becoming familiar. At 7:45, the first chimes of the day are heard from the council house clock, which has been silent all night. At 7:45 too, the transport canteen arrives, and the bus crews, conscious of having set the wheels of the city turning, can relax and refresh themselves before going back to deal with the growing tide of passengers. For the buses continue to bring in load after load. But now, instead of miners and railwaymen, engineers and mechanics, they bring shop assistants and office workers, until, as Little John strikes 9, the businessmen hurrying to their offices mark the end of the first wave, except for those who left it a little too late. The square is now given over to the business of the day, and the flow of people, though now less urgent than earlier, is nonetheless steady. There are many men among the crowds, but it is of course chiefly the women who pause before the windows to discuss the displays, to choose a purchase, or just to admire. And although children like the square, the crowded pavements are not much fun. Nearly all the buildings overhang the bottom story and are supported by pillars forming long piazzas. There are many theories about the origins of these traditional architectural features, none of them entirely convincing. It is certain, however, that they are not now likely to disappear whatever changes may take place in the buildings they support. Apart from those who come to shop, there is all day and every day a ceaseless flow of traffic and people through and around the square. For much of the business of Nottingham is conducted within easy reach of the city centre. Over 400 years ago, in the time of Henry VIII, the historian Leland wrote of Nottingham marketplace, both for the buildings on the side of it, for the very great wideness of the streets, and the clean paving of it. It is the fairest without exception in all England. As the afternoon wears on, the crowds grow thicker and slow down into queues. The workers from factories, offices and shops have begun to make their way home again. Between 5 and 6 o'clock each evening, over 25,000 passengers are transported from the square to Mapperley, Beeston, Basford and Carlton, to Linton, Radford, Sneinton and Arnold, to Trent Bridge and West Bridgeford, to Dunkirk and Hyson Green and all the other thickly populated districts of Nottingham and its suburbs, which even at the beginning of the last century were country villages, sending produce and not people to this marketplace. But the old market square is more than just a bus terminus. It has a life and many-sided character of its own. Designed with low walls and formal flower beds as a worthy frontage to the council house, it is a favourite resort of many people who come here not to go on to somewhere else, but to sit, to gossip. To study their fellows, or to remember old times. Times when this really was a marketplace, when within its 5 1/4 acres were sold pots and poultry, boots and butter, cloth and corn cures. Times when the square and the neighbouring streets were filled with the booths and roundabouts of the great goose fair. But the real inhabitants of the square are the pigeons. Officially frowned upon, they are great favourites with Nottingham people, many of whom make a special point of feeding them. At the eastern end of the square stands the council house, designed by Cecil Hite and opened in May 1929. Once the subject of much controversy, it is now a familiar and comfortable landmark whose impressive beauty dominates the city centre. At the rear of the building is a fine shopping arcade modelled on the arcade in Milan. The dome, which rises to a height of 202 feet above the pavement, has 4 groups of statuary around the base: sceptre and book, civic law; the launching of a boat, commerce; knowledge, a woman holding a globe; and prosperity shown by a mother and child group. The front of the council house is flanked by 2 large statues of lions, designed by Joseph Else. The civic part of the building is entered through an arcaded portico leading to a marble hall and the grand staircase, at the head of which stands a statue by Reed Dick, representing the spirit of welcome. To this entrance come the Lord Mayor, the Sheriff, and the Aldermen and Councillors on their way to the council chamber to discuss and arrange the affairs of Nottingham as their predecessors have done in almost the same spot for centuries past. In this building, too, are the fine rooms in which guests of the city are entertained. For in the words of the inscription beneath the dome, the Corporation of Nottingham erected this building for council and welcome, and to show merchandise and crafts. And while the formal debates on civic affairs take place within the council house, the old market square provides a forum for the free expression of all shades of opinion, both religious and political.